All right, so welcome everybody to our TUM AI lecture today. It's a real pleasure to have Victor Lempitsky here today. Victor is an associate professor at Skoltech in Moscow. He's leading the computer vision group there. He's also affiliated with the Samsung AI Center at Moscow, and I assume most of the stuff is kind of in co-authorship between these two institutions. If you don't know Victor, Victor is he's a luminary in computer vision. He's been working on these areas for quite a while, and every year he's really coming up with new stunning research. And very lately, in the last years, he's been looking at generative models specifically. And if it comes down from making the Mona Lisa talk, or photorealistic textured avatars, or neural point-based rendering, these papers probably everybody has heard by now in our community. So it's really fantastic to have such a great researcher here today. And with that, you can just go ahead and start.
Thank you, Matthias, for a really kind introduction. So the work I will be presenting today has been done by Samsung researchers. So it's with my Samsung hat on. And it is all inspired by the recent progress with generative modeling and with big GANs, right? Like you all know, there has been an amazing progress in this area. People have developed really good working GANs for 2D images, which work at high resolution, which can model really complex types of images. And Stylegun is sort of the most well-known type of these models, and it even can synthesize to some extent cats, which is sort of the holy grail in generative modeling for images, I would say. And these models are fascinating on their own, and they have applications in image editing and computer graphics, and special effects, etc. And my talk today will be about several extensions of the Stylegun model and one alternative to it. So specifically, I will be talking about three things. First, I will present two extensions of Stylegun beyond the domain of 2D images. I will show how it can be extended to two new domains, the landscape videos and 3D human avatars. Both extensions were driven by the need to solve some applied problems we were interested in at Samsung. And the two extensions are about different things, but they will be very similar in spirit, as you will see, though there will be some interesting differences. And the third part of the talk will be about building an alternative generative model that combines the ideas of Stylegun with the deep non-convolutional architectures explored recently for modeling 3D scenes like NERF or 2D images like Siren. Okay, so the first part will be about expanding Stylegun for video modeling and specifically to landscape videos. It was done by Lisa, Roman, Oleg, and Anton. And so this part of my talk will be about generating videos. And surprisingly, it will contain videos. Somehow my Zoom does not transmit videos nicely. So what you will likely see will be choppy and jerky with low frame rate. In reality, the videos look nicer, and don't take my word for it. Please check our project webpage after my talk to see the actual videos. So let me start with the problem, the landscape reenactment problem. So this is sort of an inverse problem in the following sense. We assume that there exists a video of a landscape undergoing a dynamic change, or we're giving sort of a single time slice of that change, single image, and we want to recover the full video. Of course, we don't know, to be more precise, we want to recover a plausible video which may contain that frame. Okay, and we aim to recover maybe one or a number of the videos that are consistent with the given frame. So let me straight away show you an example of what our system can do for those two frames. So I'll switch off from the full screen because in this regime it will play smoother. So these are the reenactment results for those videos, and you see the motion of sky has been recovered reasonably well, and the global daytime changes are also modeled. So before I explain the details, let me mention what the previous approaches were. Most of the previous approaches were about applying the idea of warping. So the suggestions were build a neural network that would warp the given image in a realistic way, and then after warping, it can apply some post-processing to remove warping artifacts. All the warping can happen in the some neural space, not necessarily in color space, but the idea of warping sort of was the main driver of the best of the previous approaches. Our approach will be quite different. So we will build a generative model for such videos, and then given a photograph, we will do the inference in this model. So recover the latent representation of a video which can contain this photograph. And this will give us the reenactment. So some caveats about training such a model is that getting high resolution landscape images is relatively easy. We downloaded 400K of them, and we could have had more. Getting diverse high resolution landscape time lapses is really hard. So the guys managed to get 900 of them with a lot of effort. And obviously those 900 don't represent the full diversity we're interested in. So obviously we need to build an architecture which can train from both sources, the images and the videos. Also, the videos, the time-lapse videos that we have found have very diverse playback speeds, the rate of change. So the training process should be robust to this variation in the animation speed. And we have tried a lot to learn different autoregressive models, convolutional RNNs, and perhaps because we didn't have enough videos, they all failed. Most of the runs sort of degenerated to static images, so you put in a holdout image, and then it maybe does some little change, and then it starts at some fixed states. So there were no plausible animations, or at least we couldn't get any progress with this sort of direct autoregressive model idea. So instead, we decided to build a generative model for such videos, and we built it on top of Stylegun. For the sake of completeness, let me just briefly go through the model. I know most of you probably have heard about it and probably know the details. Just to be complete, let me quickly go through it. Basically, there are two parts in the Stylegun generator. The perceptron part on the left takes the normally distributed latent variable z and transforms it into the variable of the same dimensionality w. Typically, it's something like 512 dimensions. And the transformation is a chain of matrix multiplications and nonlinearities. And the right part is convolutional with gradually increasing spatial resolution, and it consists of the chain of convolutions, normalizations, and the additions of noise tensors. So there is this separate set of latent variables of high dimensionality that are here denoted as noise. I will call them noise latent variables, although in our first model they will not be noise, they will be actually a very big part of the signal. Okay, but in Stylegun, original Stylegun, they're treated as noise. There are learnable scaling factors acting on this noise, And the left part is connected to the right part also via rescaling, denoted here with A. So we take W and we multiply it by different matrices, denoted here as A. And after each convolutional normalization in the convolutional trunk, we rescale and shift convolutional maps by the coefficients predicted from the vector W by this matrix multiplication of matrices A. And in the end of the convolutional part, we get a high resolution tensor with 3 color channels that is a color image. So this is in a nutshell the Stylegun V1 model for static image generation. And the second is quite similar. And so it is trained adversarially against a large convolutional network, the discriminator that assesses the realism. Now let me explain how we modify it in order to model videos. Basically, we do a very simple tweak. We split the Z variable into 2 unequal parts, which we call the static part and the dynamic part. So the dynamic part contains something like 3 dimensions, and the static part contains the remaining 509 dimensions. And on top of that, we duplicate the number of noise latent variables, so that now we add a reweighted noise tensor to convolutional tensors twice, where before we have added them once. So before we had sort of single addition here, now we first add the first rescaled noise, and then we add the second rescaled noise here. And we also call the first copy of noise variables, sort of the white copy, the static part, the static noise variables, and the second we call the dynamic noise variables, for the reasons that will become clear. Now, the idea behind this duplication is to achieve the following effect in the training model. Assume that we take 2 sets of latent variables that share the same static part and with different dynamic parts. And we want, as a result of the training, we want to achieve the effect such that the results of the synthesis for those 2 different sets of variables would look like 2 frames from the same videos. Okay, so by resampling the dynamic part while keeping the static part fixed, we will get more and more frames which look like video frames from the same video. Okay, so this is the idea. How do we achieve this? So we train our model on a mixed data set of static images and dynamic videos, and we train the model against 2 discriminators. The first one is the same as in the original Stylegun. Okay, so it predicts the realism score. It has real images from the large image data set, which is diverse, and the fake images come from the current state of the model. And sort of the pairwise discriminator looks at pairs of images and is similar to multi-frame discriminators used in many previous works, but in our case, we always look just at pairs, and the reason is, one of the reasons is that, remember, we have very different playback speeds in our video data sets. So we see that it's unreasonable to expect the temporal discriminators to learn all different dynamics here. So we say, okay, let us ask pairwise discriminators just to focus on consistency, not on, say, playback speed. So pairwise discriminator needs to tell us whether the pair looks like 2 frames from 2 different parts of the same video. And the real pairs of frames come from the video datasets. We take a video, take 2 different frames from it. And the fake pairs come from the current state of the model when we keep the same static variables and sample dynamic variables, both in the Z part and in the noise part. And additionally, we augment the fake pairs with sort of additional fake pairs created from real pairs. More specifically, we take individual frames from real videos, and from those frames we take two different crops, and we say that those two crops cannot correspond to two frames of the same video at the same location. So okay, so pairwise discriminator assesses whether two images correspond to the same location in the video at different times. Here we take the same time moment from real video, take two different crops, and say they cannot be consistent. Okay, and sort of we tell the pairwise discriminator two things. First, sort of this trick prevents pairwise discriminator from overfitting to the limited number of videos, because for the same video it sees the same sort of visual content both on the real side and on the fake side. So it reduces this overfitting. And second, the system sees a lot of examples where the ground features that should not move actually moves because of the cropping. And so it knows that these examples are fake, so it learns that the sort of the ground features, the features on the ground, should be kept static. And you can sort of treat it as a hack. You may call it a hack, but it's surprisingly efficient and it is important. In the second part, I will show a similar sort of model where the results are not as good, and the reason why not as good and as sort of stable is because we would not able to come up with an analogous hack. So, okay, so I explained how we do the training. Now, how do we get sample videos from this model? So remember, by resampling, we get different non-continuous frames. So to get continuous frames, we instead take a single copy of dynamic variables, and for the noise variables, we instead of resampling them, we warp them with a predefined sequence of homography transforms. We just have a bunch of homographies and apply them at corresponding to different direction of the cloud motion, and we pick one of those sequences of homographies, apply them, and it gets our clouds moving in one direction or the other direction, depending on our choice. Okay, so our model at train time does not use any motion model, and we can at sampling stage we can use other motion models just rather than working by homographies. In fact, we use something slightly more complex when we sort of mirror the homography applied below the horizon, which is, I think, fixed at the middle of the image, and the homography applied above the horizon. So here are some samples from the model. I'll again switch to from the full screen. So we'll first show a low resolution. So it shows us the diversity of videos you can sample from the model. So the natural scenes are more realistic, more plausible than those containing buildings. These are some examples at high resolution. Basically, you may not be able to assess it, but the sky motion, the cloud motion is realistic, more realistic. The water is not so realistic, and the reason is because it's very hard to learn a motion model for water from time-lapse videos. At least our system is not able to do that. Okay. So now it's fun to look at the samples. Now, how do we actually reenact real photographs? For that, we need to do inference. That is, for a given real photograph, we need to find the latent variables that reproduce this photograph. And inference in Stylegun is a very active area of research. Here are some links in parallel with us. There were many more works, most of them having roughly the same ideas that we have discovered. So I will just detail what we are doing, and you will find the same ideas in parallel papers. So what we do is we initialize latent variables W with an specially pre-trained encoder network, and so the encoder network is trained on a synthetic data set. When we generate a lot of samples from our generator, and then we train an encoder to predict style W, the W variable, from those synthetic examples. Most works on inverting Stylegun, including ours, sort of try to do inference in W space, not in Z space, because doing inference in W space is much easier, and you still can do a lot in W space. Then, once we get the prediction from the encoder, at inference time, we optimize W using an optimization process by minimizing the reconstruction error between the result of our generator for that W and the image we're trying to animate. And here we optimize over W variable and over the noise variables, which are initialized with random noise. Then, as a last stage, we fine-tune so we cannot really get the perfect fit. So to get the perfect fit, we fine-tune the parameters of the convolutions in our generator to get the perfect fit. Okay, so these are all pretty standard by now. Still, I think it's interesting to see the effect of those multiple stages. So here in each row, you see sort of the input photograph, the same in each case. Then the reconstruction that we get after a certain stage. And the third column is the reenactment. So let me again switch from the full screen. Okay. And the first row is what we get from the encoder, and you see a big mismatch between the actual photograph and its reconstruction. Second row is what we get after noise plus style optimization, and the fit is much better. Still, the results are blurry. There are some lost details in the clouds, and I think also in the foliage here. And after fine-tuning the generator, we get a really close fit, which also leads to nice animation. So here are some reenactment results for real photographs. As you know, sort of it gets the clouds moving, but we still miss the global lighting changes, right? And the reason is I told you how to animate the noise variables. I haven't told you how to animate the W variables, right? So we know how to animate the Z variables. We can just sort of smoothly change the dynamic variables in the Z part, but the thing is we cannot recover Z from W, because inverting this perceptron part is hard. It's so we try to learn a network which would invert it, and it doesn't learn. So instead, we train an auxiliary perceptron which transfers more movements in the Z space into the W space. That is, this MLP takes the current position in the W space, and it takes a desired shift in the Z space, and it predicts the corresponding shift in the W space. And we learn it on synthetic data. And using this auxiliary MLP, we can sort of take some trajectory like route in the Z space and take the initial inferred position in the W space and then sort of predict the route, the trajectory in the W space. And this gives us this kind of animation which has global lighting changes modeled in our model using Z variables without actually inferring Z's, just staying with W's. Okay, so here are the full results at low resolution. And the cloud motion is usually reasonable. For some tall buildings like here, it sort of washes away some protruding tall details, partly because there were not as many buildings in our training video data set. Some more results. I really like this project because like these videos are so nice to watch. We also have a sort of separate subpart, a bit technical. I won't go into details how to upscale from the 512 resolution at which we get our model to higher resolutions. And after this upscaling, we can get, for example, videos at 1K resolution, like these ones. And we can get even higher resolution videos. So basically, we train upscaling on images and then apply it to videos and using some semantic segmentation-based masks. And for fun, we applied to historic photographs and paintings, and it animates the clouds quite well. I particularly like the Prokudin-Gorsky example. These are sort of photographs from the pre-World War I Russian Empire, one of the first color photographs of amazing quality and of the world long gun. And they are eerily realistic in the sense that they are color photographs from 100 years ago, and adding motion to them is really, really fun. Okay, so this is what we get with the cloud reenactment part. Now let me move on to the second part about 3D human avatars. This is joint work with Karim, Artur, Anastasia, Renat, Ilya, and Alexander. And let me quickly mention that our work is motivated by our interest in 3D telepresence. Modeling human appearance in 3D is obviously a very challenging thing to do. I don't need to explain it in this audience. It has many conflicting needs. What I will present today is very far from perfection, but I think it's still an interesting step. So we'll build our avatar model on two components. The first one is simplex, which, as you know, is a deformable parametric mesh model from Michael Black's lab, which models sort of naked bodies without clothing and without hair. And the second part is the deferred neural ranging from your lab. So in your original paper, you showed that how to use it for faces. We showed that the two combine nicely for full bodies, and then we add the generative modeling on top, the way I will show. So the original part without generative modeling works as follows, as you would expect. We have some neural texture, like in different neural modeling. We wrap it around the simplex parametric body model. We have the renderer, which creates RGB plus mask. So this is a convolutional unit type renderer. Then we have a different pose. We'll wrap the same texture, and the renderer should give us a different pose. And as in deferred neural rendering, we can fit it, for example, to videos of the person, segmented videos of the person, by minimizing some reconstruction loss when we compare the prediction of the model and the ground truth frames. So for those ground truth frames, we have fitted SMPL meshes, simplex meshes, and then sort of our model should give us the same result as in the ground truth. We get the mismatch, and that's our loss. We backprop it, and we update the parameters of the renderer, and we update the parameters of the texture. And we use standard losses, perceptual, adversarial, feature matching losses, and we can train a model for a single person, or we can train a model for a number of people. Like usually you have like 50 people, which share the same renderer network parameters and have individual neural textures. Okay. The results are interesting. So this thing works quite well. They're not perfectly realistic. Let me play it here, even though it will be choppier. So here, so these are models created from long videos, animated by the motion captured from the third person. Okay, and as a reminder, so the mesh itself models the body without clothing or hair. Clothing or hair is modeled, is added by the neural rendering. And it works reasonably well even for loose clothing like skirts and long hair. Okay, now comes the generative part. The previous animation, the previous avatars were created from videos, although the videos does not need to be very long to get a reasonably good model, but still it needs to be a video. The training needs to be really lengthy. So here we want an ability to create model from single or few photographs. So that's why we add this generative model. So the generative model is a Stylegun generator which creates generative textures, which creates neural textures. And we train this Stylegun generator together with the renderer parameter against two discriminators, the unity discriminator and the pairwise discriminator. Okay, so we have this pipeline, Stylegun generator, the rasterizer, which wraps neural texture over the simplex mesh, the renderer network, and we train all this pipeline against the discriminators end to end. Note that here we don't need sort of differentiable rendering because we only backprop to the texture. We don't sort of modify the simplex parameters. Okay, and as before, unity discriminator looks at individual frames. Pairwise discriminator uses it pairs of frames, either two frames from the video of the same person or two frames created by our model for two different poses or two different camera viewpoints, but with the same texture. Okay, so the model learns in this way that if the texture is the same, then the result should look like the images of the same person, the same clothing. Okay. So we train it on a large data set of TEDx talks. Fortunately, while it's very diverse in terms of demographics and clothing, it's not high resolution, and viewpoints are not very diverse. And there is like some very peculiar lighting, like also blue lighting somehow. So we also add a bunch of, so with the sort of a kitchen sink approach to data sets, so we throw in basically all data sets we could come up with. And I still think that the quality of the results is still kind of bottlenecked by the data. So unsurprisingly, we get better training data, the results will be better. But probably we just need better method, obviously. Still, let me show the samples from this model. I think they are very interesting. So here I show pairs of renderings for, in each case, I take the same texture sample from our model and take rendering for two different poses. And you see that the model sort of learns how to model clothing and long hair in this way. There is some diversity in clothing, some demographic diversity, though faces and hands are not perfectly realistic. Let me also show these models being animated. I think these are fun to look at, even if they're not perfectly realistic. So they all repeat the same animations. And they do it in parallel. It's somehow particularly fine. So these are, I call them style people, because they come from Stylegun. Okay, so how do we do inference in this model? It's essentially the same. Given say, a single frame, we use an encoder to predict W, then we optimize the W variables, then we optimize the generator parameters. Optimizing over noise variables in this case was not giving us much. And then as a last step, as a last resort, as a last step in this optimization process, we optimize over the texture directly. And again, we minimize a bunch of reconstruction losses between what our model gives us for the given SMPL pose that we fit to the input frame and the actual frame. Let me show you some one-shot results. So here, given this single frame, this is the avatar that the encoder part gives us, and this is this sequence of frames, which you see corresponds to the avatar that will cover our full approach recovers. And you see like that we sort of get the details in the back in a possible way. Okay. This is another approach. Another example, which our model here in our model works well. Particularly, I think simplify SMPL fitting procedure doesn't fit the body shape right, and to fix that, recently we added a modification where we also backprop into the simplex parameter using differentiable rendering from renderer from NVIDIA, and then the results get better, but we don't show them here. This is like the last example. Take a single frame from a TEDx talk, and then it gives us this kind of avatar. And I think this particular logo in the back is transferred from the training data set, from the Humbi data set, where a similar logo is at one of the subjects. So it overfits a little bit onto a Humbi data set, which is a big part of our training data. Okay. So here are our results for avatars, and let me move to the last part of my talk, which is about new generative model. And this is joint work with Ivan, Kirill, Taras, Gleb, and Denis. This work is inspired by recent results in modeling 3D scenes and individual images, where approaches like NERF or Siren shown that you can model 3D scenes or images with perceptrons. And our idea was, let's just expand this model to generate classes of images, 2D images. And we were curious how well would it work. And in parallel with us, people have also expanded to generative models of 3D scenes. So those models solve a more ambitious task, modeling 3D. So they get the results at lower resolution. Our results are at high resolution, but only for 2D. So let me explain straight away the model that we have come up with. So it combines the idea of perceptron generation and Stylegun version 2. So the left part of our generator is exactly as in Stylegun version 2. It sort of takes the latent variable z, passes it through a set of matrix multiplications and nonlinearities to get the vector w. And the right part is what's novel. Unlike Stylegun, here we have a non-convolutional generator which takes the coordinate of, which essentially generates the color of each pixel independently from all other pixels. Okay, so to generate the color of the pixels, we take the coordinate of that pixel, x, y. We pass it through a number of sine wave activations with learnable frequencies and biases. And we concat it with a fixed vector corresponding to that particular position in the image, with the coordinate embedding of that particular position. And we take this big vector and then we just pass it through a bunch of matrix multiplications and nonlinearities. And after every second step, we project it into three-dimensional space and treat it as an RGB, and we sum up all those RGB values from all stages to get the final RGB value. And the W vector affects the matrices in this matrix multiplication steps in the following way. So we multiply W by a certain matrix A, the learnable matrix A, and then we get, with this resulting vector, we reweigh the matrix columns, and after this reweighting in the mod stage, we normalize, L2 normalize matrix rows in the demod stage, okay? And then we get a new matrix, which depends on W, and we use it inside those matrix multiplications. But given W, each pixel is generated independently, so we'll call this architecture conditionally independent pixel synthesis generator, or SIPS generator. So there are all operations like spatial convolutions, like up convolutions, like bilinear upsamplings. They are all absent from this architecture, so pixels are truly independent given W, and I can sort of generate any subset of pixels I want. Okay, so the resulting architecture is at 256 resolution is 3 or 4 times slower than Stylegun V2 generator of analogous capacity because the pixels don't share computation at low resolution. And we use non-parametric position embeddings and learnable Fourier features, that is sine embeddings with learned parameters. Okay, let me show you the samples from the model. They're actually quite good. So these are samples for the model. Yeah, and we trained this whole thing against the standard Stylegun V2 discriminator, which is convolutional, which is just taken from Stylegun. So the samples look nice. These are samples from for faces on the left and Elson churches on the right. These are popular data sets. These are our sort of own data sets. So the data set that we picked on our own, less standard, the one for satellite views of urban areas, the one for exotic landscape views from satellite, from Google Earth View. And so this is a small data set, so it shows how our model works for small training sets. And these are sort of large data set of landscapes. It shows the quality of landscape it can generate. If you compare it to Stylegun v2 in terms of FID scores, so it's a tie. So for some data sets, Stylegun v2 is better. For some data sets, the new model is better. And it's actually, I mean, it's hard. From those 5 data sets we have tried it on, it's hard to conclude decisively when one is better or the other. So that's just the fact. On the right here, I will show the typical artifacts for the new generator, which would be atypical for Stylegun, and those artifacts, they basically all can be nailed to harmonic embeddings in the input, leaking through the whole architecture to the output, like this sort of quite parametric waves in the hair, or maybe sort of this artifact here. Okay, it's interesting to see the positional embeddings learned in this model. So this is one for faces, and it sort of reflects the fact that faces in FFHQ are all aligned. These are for churches, and this part here, I think, corresponds to the part that are the results of the watermarks, and this is a landscape positional embedding. So here we show they're high dimensional, but for each position we show the first 3 PCA, coordinates. Okay, there are some things we can do here which we would not be able to do easily with convolutional generators. For example, we can train the model, teach the model to generate cylindrical panoramas. So these are cylindrical panoramas generated by our model. They're sort of circular. So the left is can be attached seamlessly to the right. And here the model has never seen panoramas during training. So just standard photographs. And we pretended during training that those photographs came from panoramas. So the discriminator only saw the fragments, and the embeddings, the sign embeddings were defined over the cylinder, and the positional embeddings were learned over the full cylinder. So in this way, we can sort of force the model to learn the consistent panoramas, but never show them the panoramas during training. We can do foveated synthesis, where we synthesize a subset of pixels, for example, more pixels towards the center of the image and less pixels towards the outer parts of the image. So here, for example, we only get 5% of the pixels and we interpolate the rest. We can scale it to higher resolution than 256, and we run out of memory because we don't share the low resolution part. So this is the disadvantage of our method compared to convolutional generator. But we can sort of overcome it to some extent by letting discriminators see fragments generated with strides. So here in this example, our discriminator sees examples with at 512 resolution generated either with stride 1 or stride 2. So the stride 2 examples span the full image. Stride 1 example, it would be some part, some quarter of the sort of quarter-sized part of the image. So these samples, but because of these compromises, these samples are worse than Stylegun v2, still there, I think, reasonably good. Okay, so this is the overview of this new architecture. Recently, we got some interesting results for inference. I think there are some quite specific and interesting things you can do for inference, which is dissimilar to what you would get in Stylegun in convolutional generators. So I think that's an interesting direction. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion. So I've shown you 2 ways to extend Stylegun to two new modalities, videos and avatars. The common idea here was the pairwise discriminator, learning with pairwise discriminators. And we can apply the resulting models to solving inverse tasks, like recovering video or avatar from a single image. And also showing you the new non-convolutional generators, which sort of combine the idea of Stylegun and North Siren. Okay, so thank you for your attention. I think, have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for the great talk. Are there any questions? So if there are any questions on Zoom, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Maybe since we are almost all taking a look at 3D, so what do you think in terms of being able to pull this kind of generative quality to 3D? Can we basically use the same kind of principles in order to get similar quality results, at least in restricted domains?
Well, I think this idea of style-based synthesis, they obviously should transfer to 3D. I mean, so it boils down to the fact that you remind your model about the latent vector multiple times through the architecture. And I think this is a reasonable thing to do and should boost the quality. Obviously, the size of the data set is an issue, and memory is an issue, right? I think we came up with the same ideas as in 3D papers, in the sense that we tried to, for example, train. Okay, we said, okay, we can generate arbitrary subset of pixels, so let's have only discriminators which look at small fragments, or which look at images with big strides, so that we can overcome the memory problem. But we've discovered that this training really worsens the results compared. So if possible, it's useful to have discriminators which look at the full image. And I think the memory problem is maybe worse for training 3D models.
Mm-hmm. And in the inverse kind of direction, do you think it is necessary to have at some point some kind of implicit 3D understanding or structure behind these kinds of image generative models?
Yeah, I mean, I think to generate, well, one interesting experiment which we did, and I'm sure like many other groups did while working on avatars, was to see if Stylegun can generate realistic humans, and the answer is it cannot, because it doesn't understand geometry, right? So immediately when you put in the mesh model of real humans, you get much better results. So obviously, yeah, geometry is the way forward. Yeah, there's no question about that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? I mean, I have one question actually. So, I mean, if you're thinking about, I mean, a lot of the stuff is obviously the data. How much is data versus how much is architecture? If you're thinking about getting like these results on 2D, right? I mean, do we have to work more on like different operators maybe instead of like 2D convolutions also? Do we need to do anything there, or do we have to just add more layers and add more data, and you know we can represent more complicated distributions? Or like, what do you think is the right trajectory from here?
Yeah, I think the interesting part starts when you understand that you are sort of short of data and you know, cannot solve everything by just throwing more data. Then you need to be creative about architectures which have certain inductive biases, like when you generate humans, then human meshes give you a very strong inductive bias, so it gives you a big boost. Maybe if we had, 1 billion human videos, then very naive architecture without human mesh in the middle would just solve everything. If we could wait for 100 years, right? But then, since we don't have this data, we need to model geometry. And with this Fourier features, again, sort of it reflects the fact that textures are repetitive. They have this typical frequencies, so we get this inserted in the model through this architecture choice. So yeah, I think the interesting part is when there is not enough data, and then understanding your architecture and your choices is really what is helpful and interesting.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Any other questions?
Hey, thanks for the talk. I actually have a question. So a few weeks ago, we had a talk from Niloy, and he was talking about like explicit control basically for generative models or implicit. So like for GANs or for Stylegun, you have like these styles basically where you already can control some aspects. But like for the main content of the image, you always need to search or basically try to find the latent code again. What's your take, like with GANs, basically, how far can we basically control the entire generation process?
Well, not sure I'm answering exactly your question, but obviously with GANs, there is always this issue of partial mode collapse and the fact that you get nice samples, but they don't cover your distribution. And in these examples, in the projects I've talked today, it's particularly acute in the second project when in many cases where samples are nice, they look well, but when we try to infer W for real person, we realize that it's not in our sort of GAN space, not in our image of our generator, and so to some extent we control it. We compensate for that by adjusting the convolutional parameters. But it it violates, well, the second trick which everybody uses, including us, is sort of augment the W space, replicate it to have different styles for different parts of the architecture. The idea I didn't mention for the third part that you can also replicate spatially, right? So you can sort of infer different styles for different pixels. And that makes your inference even more flexible. But then, of course, it violates the conditions under which you train. So the resulting avatars, for example, may fit well the image, but they will not animate nicely. So the problem of control is there. Does it answer your question, or did I? I'm answering the wrong one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions? Maybe one last question. And maybe I have one last question. Like, what do you think is, I don't know, what domains are more interesting in a sense? Like, I mean, I understand you're doing a bunch of stuff from like landscapes to humans to faces. I don't know, what's the most interesting thing in a sense? Because you could argue in a sense the GANs and so on, they're competing with classic graphics in a sense, right? You could say, oh, why don't we just remodel this stuff? So I don't know, how do you see the right domains and how does it fit in content creation processes, I guess?
Well, my personal interest is in modeling, is in going more 3D, right? So like merging classical graphics and this neural stuff. I think it's very similar to yours and your group. yeah, I think that's the most exciting thing right now, at least for me.
Yeah, it's a cool area. Can agree more. Okay, all right. I think we're running a little bit out of time. Thanks really so much. I think it's obviously it's really amazing work. I hope the students pick up a lot of the things here. And yeah, I mean, I hope next time we'll see each other in person. So really, thanks a lot.
Thank you.